Hi everyone and welcome to This Is Why We Fight. I'm Jo.
And I'm Jordan.
Hello and welcome to part 3 of our series discussing the Behavioural Insights team and the way the government manipulates us. How are you, Jordan?
I'm well, thank you. How are you?
I'm very good, thank you. So lots to get through. We briefly covered MINDSPACE, the owner of MINDSPACE, or the creator of it, during the last podcast. And we're going to delve into that a bit deeper this evening. So without further ado, let's have a look. So this is created by it's joint collaboration, the Cabinet Office and the Institute for Government. This is, of course, the Behavioural Insights team is trying to push itself so far away from government, it's quite ridiculous. As you can see, this is influencing behaviour through public policy. And we did mention the ways that they do it and how they've broken them down. This is really rather sinister when you look into it.
Yeah, the thing that I really took from reading through this document, well, as much of it as I have done so far, is just the tone that they take constantly. It's so belittling.
It's very much a discussion of sort of big brains, superior minds, talking about the plebs, isn't it? Yeah,
it really is. I said that as much last week, but actually reading through this properly, it's kind of degrading in a way.
Well, it is, because while they constantly talk about the benign nature of what they do, they are taking our choices from us, and there's no mistake going through this document that that's what they're doing. But I guess we're just not clever enough to know what's best for us.
Yeah, even the way that they frame it, though, the way that they frame reducing our choices is really manipulative and quite clever.
Absolutely.
Because it enables them to take their hands off and say, we didn't do it, you did it. And we're going to be getting some proper examples of that as we go through this document.
Well, yeah, they do this all the time, don't they? They make these things happen and then they say, whoa, it wasn't us. We're just here to clean up the mess. But it's always the mess they create in the first place.
Yeah, there was actually one segment that said that pretty much outright. I hope I've got that highlighted on another document, because that's later on in this 96-page piece of toilet paper.
Yeah, so just for clarification, you won't be settling in for like a 3-hour podcast. We're going to have to split this into sections because there's just so much to go through. But we hope you find it illuminating. We hope you are able to share this with people, and we hope that you can take something useful from it. And if we'd like to see any outcome from this series, it would be that people recognise when they're being coerced or manipulated. And they can start to spot these things happening moving forward by realising how many times they've been a part of this in the past, of course without their consent or knowledge. So yes, we hope you find this useful. Turning their own tools against them, which I very much like. So anyway, without further ado, let's have a look. So this report is based on MINDSPACE itself, and MINDSPACE, of course, being the key to everything else the Behavioural Insight team does, really. This is the groundswell of information that they decided to turn into that department. So let's have a look at what they say. I've highlighted a few bits and pieces we want to go through. And it starts immediately, Jordan. Straight in there.
It doesn't pull any punches, does it? Influencing people's behaviour is nothing new to the government, which has often used tools such as legislation, regulation and taxation to achieve desired policy outcomes. Now it's also using psychological manipulation.
Yes. Yes. But we must trust the state, right? That they know what's best for us. How could we possibly know with our tiny little brains?
This document basically reads as "Trust us, we're the experts." .pdf.
Yeah, exactly. It's really quite condescending at times, or most of the time. They talk about health policies, biggest policy challenges we're now facing, such as the increase in people with chronic health conditions. I wonder who calls those. will only be resolved if we are successful in persuading people to change their behaviour, their lifestyles, or their existing habits. But they're not persuading people, are they? They're carrying out experiments without people's knowledge. This isn't an open discussion where people are given choices.
But more importantly, notice the self-agency is completely evaporated. We're no longer in control of our own lives. It is entirely down to these people to save us.
Well, who's going to save us from them?
Us.
That's
You
the
and
real
I.
question.
You and I and everybody who reads this document. But imagine saying the only way we're going to the only way we're going to solve the health crisis is if the government is successful in persuading people to change their behaviour. What a weird way to word that, especially considering it was the government in the first place that pushed for things like margarine, and it was the government in the first place that pushed for that silly little food triangle where the majority of things you're meant to be eating, according to them, is bread, which we now know is absolutely horrific for us and we shouldn't be eating it.
Or smoking. That was introduced by the government.
Indeed it was. They were also introduced by health officials. If you remember, 9 out of 10 doctors smoke Camel, or whatever it was.
Yes, I don't remember it, but I have looked into it. And cigarettes contain formaldehyde. So, you know, you're literally smoking the things that funeral homes use to embalm dead bodies.
You're using the thing that they use to... I'm not sure what the word is, like stabilise, cleanse, maybe? Anthrax spills.
Preserve dead flesh.
Well, or preserve dead flesh, fair enough. But no, the most amazing thing there is formaldehyde is saying that it kills off anthrax. So if there's like an anthrax spill in a lab, they spray it over with formaldehyde.
Wow. Smokers unite then. If there's an anthrax scare, you'll be good to go.
This explains why the Soviets like smoking so much.
It's rather amazing, though, when you think what formaldehyde is and what it does. People who smoke should have perfectly preserved skin, shouldn't they? It doesn't seem to work that way. You see these pictures of smokers' mouths, you know, where they're all lined and crinkled, like they've been sucking a lemon all their life.
Mm-hmm.
Very weird.
This has gone off subject.
It has a bit, sorry. So they go on to say, whilst behavioural theory has already been deployed to good effect in some areas, it has much greater potential to help us. I love this word, us. Do they mean us or do they mean them? Because this, as they constantly remind people, is a discussion document. This is them having a chat. Anyway, this is a full report and it tackles complex issues on which there are wide-ranging public views. I bet there are. Let's have a look. So the authors of this document, this little collaborative effort, Paul Dolan is a professor of economics in the Department of Social Policy at the London School of Economics. Michael Hallsworth is senior researcher for the Institute for Government. David Halpin, we've mentioned him before, is the director of research at the Institute for Government. David Halpin, do you want to remind everyone?
Tony Blair.
Yep.
That's all anybody needs to know. Tony Blair.
He worked for Tony Blair, that wonderful Britain-loving Prime Minister that we had, who never did any harm to Britain.
I just realised something. He was the chief strategist at the Prime Minister's Strategy Unit between 2001 and 2007.
Yes.
This man helped out with the weapons of mass destruction thing. Just saying.
What are you saying? He can't be trusted? No.
At the very least, he was involved in the same sort of circuit.
Oh dear. That's not looking good on your resume, is it, David Halpin? We've also got Dominic King, is a specialty registrar in general surgery and a clinical research fellow in the Department of Surgery and Cancer at Imperial College London. And someone called Ivo Vlev is a senior lecturer in psychology in the Faculty of Medicine at Imperial College London. So there you go. That's the collaborators. And this is the report that they worked together to produce. I'm going to skip this part because it's boring and get down to the meat. So this is the executive summary. This is their summary, essentially, and not for the plebs. Influence in behaviour is central to public policy. Wow, what a surprise there.
Since when?
Well, governments have always influenced behaviour. They've just not been as underhand about it as they are currently.
I'm not entirely sure that's true. They've always been about taking some tax revenue and allegedly trying to improve infrastructure.
Yeah, but you could argue
I'm
that
not sure when
laws...
this idea came about, that they're there to influence behaviour.
I wouldn't say it's central to public policy, but I mean, creating laws does, in effect, influence behaviour. It causes effect in behaviour. Once you criminalise something, you take it from being open, like I don't know, something you could trade suddenly becomes illegal. It does influence your behaviour because now it's a black market and you're not trading openly in that particular product. So it does influence behaviour. I wouldn't have said, though, that it's the main central cause of public policy. I thought policy was supposed to be, idealist that I am, the protection of citizens and the efficient running of a country.
I would agree. That was basically my point. I will concede that, yeah, fair enough. Government does influence behaviour.
But it should be secondary. It shouldn't be the aim.
That's what it is about this thing. The influencing behaviour is the aim. That's the aim of the game. That's what they're trying to do. Just very uncomfortable.
They go on to say, for policymakers facing policy challenges such as crime, obesity or environmental sustainability, behavioural approaches offer a potentially powerful new set of tools. Applying these tools can lead to low-cost, low-pain ways of nudging citizens, or ourselves, they don't consider themselves as citizens then, into new ways of acting by going with the grain of how we think and act. There's that word nudging again. Low-cost, low-pain. What on earth could they possibly mean by low-cost and low-pain? How does pain factor into this?
I'm trying to think. Any of the examples they've given, because they give 5 or 6 examples throughout this document, if there's any painful choices that people had to make.
Well, they do talk about health, don't they? So maybe that's what they're talking about.
They obviously don't mean physical pain. They just mean the pain of going along with something new. I don't think there is, off the top of my head.
But you mean like being forced to believe something that is so obviously scientifically false that you have to melt your brain to just accept that it's true? Yeah, that could be painful.
Are you taking a dig at him for his weapons of mass destruction by any chance?
Not at all.
Oh, the other thing maybe.
I was actually thinking of other things that are patently false. Like, I don't know.
No, leave it there.
Yeah, okay, that's another podcast. Anyway, let's have a little dig deeper. We're going to put a link to the podcast, to the PDF document report onto the podcast, so you can have a look yourself. But it's quite a wieldy document, so we've highlighted what we thought were the most salient points. So they've already talked about the tools that they can use. And they go on to say, tools such as incentives and information are intended to change behaviour by changing minds. If we provide the carrots and sticks alongside accurate information, people will weigh up the revised costs and benefits of their actions and respond accordingly. This is very arrogant.
Unfortunately, evidence suggests that people do not always respond in the perfectly rational way.
Well, who decides what's rational?
Who decides what's good? That's another issue that I have with this. They're constantly deciding for us what is the best course of action.
But what if what's best for them isn't best for you, an individual, or you, a group, or you, a nation, or some kind of subset within that nation? They're already deciding the outcome before they even implement the nudge. And this is the whole point. The outcome is the outcome they want, not the outcome that is best for you necessarily. They talk about carrots and sticks. That is government, right? Carrots and sticks. Let's talk about financial incentives or punishments. Let's talk about, for instance, fines being issued. during the most financially depressing, and I mean that economically, lockdown period, probably in the last 100 years. A government that issues fines as punishment to people who have lost their livelihood and their job. That's most definitely a stick. But look at the carrots that they've offered. Didn't they try to entice people to get the test or one of the jabs with a payout to people on, I was going to say universal income, but that's not the one I'm thinking of.
That's coming down the line.
What's that benefit called? Universal
credit?
Credit, yes. Wasn't there a financial incentive?
That was if you downloaded their track and trace app.
Ah, that's right. Thank you. I couldn't remember exactly what it was.
I think that only took place in Wales. I'm not sure.
Even so, that's a nice carrot, isn't it? Allow the government to track you. And they'll give you money if you do. But I suppose they had to try and justify the test and trace being successful, right? They needed people to participate. And when you've destroyed essentially your whole country's economy, I imagine a lot of people could be persuaded for £500. It's a lot of money when you've got nothing and you've lost everything. Not judging, by the way. It is a lot of money. That wasn't sarcasm. I truly mean it. But that's a carrot. The stick, of course, is fining you for going shopping or travelling to work, or at least threatening to.
For trying to be independent.
Yes. But yes, it's perfectly rational. Even that's in quotation marks, because there's no arbitrary rational behaviour. It's completely subjective.
The fact that it's prefaced by "unfortunately."
Well, yes.
You know, unfortunately, our test subjects are incredibly stupid and they don't respond in a perfectly rational way. That's really how this reads.
It doesn't read that for me. What it reads for me is, unfortunately, people are individuals. How do we get them all to behave the same way?
Oh, it does read that way as well.
Because they go on to mention changing context. Context is subjective to the individual. And what they would like is some kind of Stepford country, right? Where everyone thinks the same, feels the same, does the same. It'd be much easier for them to manage, wouldn't it? Put out a rule, everyone follows the rule. Take away a freedom, nobody complains. I guess they're quite annoyed with Brits at the moment because people are thinking for themselves and making their own informed decisions as to what's best for them and their families. Interesting. I didn't highlight this part, but I should have. This is interesting. This part here. With this in mind, we set out 9 of the most robust, non-coercive, why do they need to add that? Non-coercive influences. By definition, an influence is coercion. On our behaviour, they're using our again, captured in a simple mnemonic, MINDSPACE, which can be used as a quick checklist when making policy. Now, we've covered MINDSPACE very briefly before. Here it is. We will revisit this as well at the end of this series to remind you exactly what it's about. But they do talk about the things that the average person is influenced by on a daily basis. They're not creating this influence. They are simply utilising influences we already have and taking control of them. If they can control our influences, they can control us, right?
Mm-hmm.
Anyway, again, lots and lots of information. I'll let you all read through this after. This part was particularly interesting. Do you want to read this part, Jordan? Public permission and personal responsibility.
I'm just getting down there. So unusually, I can't see Joe's screen. I'm not quite as up to date as chat will be. Public permission and personal responsibility. The use of MINDSPACE or other nudge-type policy tools may require careful handling. In essence, the public need to give permission and help shape how such tools are used. So, the fact that they're saying the public need to give permission, first off, it goes directly against something else they've said in this document. And it also kind of implies that they know they're wrong. They know what they're doing is a little bit shady.
Or at least they need a qualifier that we've agreed to it, so they can't be accused of doing anything underhand.
Oh yeah, and wait until you see what the what their standard is. It's incredibly, incredibly bloody low. It may as well just be we spoke to a couple of people down the pub and that was good enough for us. Anyway, with this in mind, we consider issues around gaining democratic permission for behavioural change policies.
Right, I want to just interrupt there. Democratic permission for behaviour change policies. Like what? The Race Relations Act? Hate speech laws? Whose permission did they gain for that? Do you recall being consulted?
There's something else kind of uncomfortable about this. We consider issues around gaining democratic permission for behavioural change policies. It's like you're a shrink. Well, they are psychiatrists, to be fair. They have to gain permission from their patients in order to undergo hypnosis.
That's a very good analogy. What they're essentially doing is they're forcing us to change, but so that we can't accuse them of any underhand behaviour, they must be seen to have our permission to do so. But we're not giving our permission or our consent. We're not even, in many cases, being consulted. So that's really just a false statement. I mean, they consider issues around gaining permission. Consider them.
I didn't notice that word.
But they don't actually engage with gaining permission because I guess those damn independent people with all their different opinions...
They consider it. They take it on board.
And then they dismiss it.
Yeah, upon taking it on board, they decide that your concerns are not actually that big of an issue. You don't need to worry about them. It's okay, just let the government program you. That's, to me, is how this sentence reads. With that in mind, we need to consider whether or not it's ethical to psychologically manipulate the public and program them in ways that we've predefined.
Or not just program either. Those who won't submit to programming will be forced to change their behaviour.
Or at the very least, they will be severely inconvenienced.
Or punished.
Or that in some cases.
Sorry to interrupt. Carry on.
We explain how 3 factors are particularly useful for understanding controversy around behavioural change. Who the policy affects, what type of behaviour is intended, how the change will be accomplished.
How it will be accomplished. Not how it will be suggested. Accomplished. They're already looking at end game here.
Yeah, they've already done it. They're already successful.
They've already written the legislation. And now it's a case of how do we get the public to accept this legislation, especially those who never would under any other circumstances.
These people have read too many sports psychologist books. That's the point. They hear the likes of Alan Shearer and David Beckham go on and on and on about how they just need to, before the game, they focus and they imagine what they're going to do. They've done the same bloody thing. The difference is these people are doing it with government policy, even though this isn't any sort of government policy document. This is simply a discussion document.
Absolutely. So, this is always a disclaimer. This will never be legislation, except we know it is.
As I said to you earlier on, it sounds like the World Economic Forum do as well.
The world is an experiment, and we are, unfortunately, the guinea pigs. These people don't care how we come to behave the way they want us to, as long as we do. And that last paragraph pretty much explains that. How the change will be accomplished. There is no failure here. There is no, we'll give it a try, and if it doesn't work, we'll move on to something else. They won't stop. And I'd like to remind everyone about the EU referendum that took place in several countries that was rejected and rephrased and repurposed and presented again. I know Ireland was one. What was the other? There were 2
Denmark,
more countries.
France.
So, again, how the change will be accomplished. There is no failure here. Once they decide they want something to happen, it will happen. It just depends how hard they have to work to make it happen. But they will get the outcome they want, no matter what the cost is to anyone else. Anyway, sorry I interjected again.
He goes on to say, behavioural change is often seen as the government intruding on issues that should be the domain of personal responsibility.
Yes.
However, don't worry, these people, they have our back. They're here for the little guy. However, it is possible for government to just apply the trigger. They've done that on a number of occasions, unfortunately.
Oh, yes.
They could have picked a better word. However, it is possible for government to just apply the trigger or support for individuals to take greater personal responsibility. And we suggest that evidence from behavioural theory may, in some areas, challenge accepted notions of personal responsibility.
That's an unbelievable statement right there. Government to supply the trigger. We know that they do this. We know they've done this. They continue to do this.
I think Mao was pretty good at supplying the trigger, wasn't he?
When you think of all the ways the government plays its role, because it is a role, I mean, they're all actors. They're all playing a part. And the government, in tandem with the media, they have certain things that they know will trigger people. Like when they want to get people out in the streets protesting so they can kettle them and arrest them and literally beat people up for just, engaging in their democratic right to protest. All of these things are triggers. When they introduce hateful policies that privilege one group above another, that's another way they do it. That's another trigger. They're not here to make people's lives better or make people happy. They are here to cause problems and control the outcome. And sometimes the outcome will be that they want to introduce legislation that would otherwise not be possible. And that's something for everyone to remember. That we do have a responsibility not to play into their games and enable them to do things they wouldn't otherwise be able to do. Oh, these people are so hateful. Anyway, let's carry on.
I think the main thing is we have to be the barriers that they keep pointing out.
Yes, well, this is why we have to stop engaging. They do all these things under this blanket of implied consent. Well, we don't consent, but we have to be clear that we don't. The default is that we consent unless we say otherwise. How many times in the last, 10 years, can anyone say they've genuinely refused to consent to something? Made their voice heard, signed a petition. It doesn't matter what it is, it's just the act of doing it. The act of saying, no, I do not agree. I do not consent to this. I suspect until the last year or two, or maybe, be generous, let's go back to 2016. I suspect prior to that, a lot of people just accepted that things were what they were and that they're just one person, right? So they're not really going to make a difference, so why bother? But if each of those one people came together, they would make a difference. And the government relies on the fact that we've become so apathetic and that we've become so disjointed. We're not acting as one. Divide and conquer is a well-used phrase for a reason. It's a classic. And it's supremely effective, and it always has been. And you can argue it always will be. But these tools that they talk about, they have used them against us for decades, probably longer.
The really funny thing to me is in this opening section, they've mentioned a number of times about gaining the consent of the public. In this example we displayed last week, or on the first episode, I can't remember which one it was, the washing machines.
Oh, yes.
Even though it is a relatively minor thing, there was no consent going on there. There's no consent going on in any of their experiments. It is a case of, in the ideal world, we would get the public consent, but there are some things we're unable to get the public consent on. For those things, we can act in shady and underhanded ways and just manipulate them from the shadows.
They also were very specific in that section that you're referring to, that they understood that if they actually came out publicly and recommended a course of action, that the public would ignore it or reject it. They know this to be the case.
Mm-hmm.
And this is why they go to such great lengths to make it appear that the recommendations we receive from private businesses or so-called private or separate organisations are just that, and not acting on the whims of the government. Coercion only works if the messenger seems benign, and they go on to talk about that a bit more in this report, and pretty much all of the documents actually that we found on the Behavioural Insight team. They know how important it is that the messenger seems benign. And we've said this all along.
They're very insistent on making sure the messenger is not seen as being somebody from the government.
Yes. Because they know that ultimately you're more liable to trust something that is not part of the state, that it appears to be an unbiased source, except none of them are unbiased because they're acting on behalf of the state. They'll just have a private company name. Or they may even go so far as to appear to be anti-establishment while they're nudging you into a decision. Because it's all very cloak and dagger, this behaviour, isn't it? It's all very underhand. They refer to MINDSPACE as also being helpful to identify any barriers that are currently preventing changes in behaviour. Now, when they talk about these barriers, again, this can be taken two ways. You can talk about a benign factor like, I don't know,
one example they give for this, actually, going back to washing machines, because these people seemingly are obsessed with washing machines. Later on in the document, they go on about if the government decides to nudge people to turn their temperature down on the washing machine down to 15 degrees, that's all very well and good. The problem is washing machines don't go down to that temperature. Thereby, it's going to cause frustration as people are unable to turn their washing machine down to 15 degrees.
Yeah.
That's the sort of barrier they're on about.
Well, that's the benign barrier they're on about.
Mm-hmm.
But what other barriers could there be that prevent people changing their behaviour? Maybe a policy that disgusts them or that they fundamentally disagree with.
Mm-hmm. And that's where things like norms come in.
Yes.
And defaults and messengers and all of that jazz.
And that's
really where this comes into play.
Yes. This is why they have to nudge and influence, because under any other circumstances you would reject what it is they're trying to do.
Mm-hmm. I think it's important when going through this to always acknowledge the best possible reading of what they're trying to tell you. So, for example, I just mentioned about the washing machines not being able to go down cold enough, that sort of thing. Because that's the sort of thing that they want you to pay attention to. That's what they want you to believe. But then you have to look through it a little tiny bit more. At the end of the day, the people who wrote this are not trustworthy people. Beyond the fact the geezer worked for Tony Blair during the weapons of mass destruction incident, these people are psychologists. These people are writing documents about how they're trying to manipulate people. They've written this document in a very, very, very specific way. They are trying to get you to see them as benign. They're trying to get you to see them as just nice, helpful people who are doing their best. And in fairness, some of them may be. But the odds that all of them are is kind of low. And then the odds that everybody who uses these techniques are going to be benign are also incredibly low.
Well, this is the problem. The document itself could have been written with good intentions, but it has been accessible to and used by individuals and groups we know do not have benign intentions. So being on the receiving end, as we individuals are, who can guess the intentions? And we haven't even really touched upon the many, many ways that we have been influenced or nudged or coerced or manipulated by the group that is responsible as the nudge unit, and by these authors who created the very foundational basis for the nudge unit, or the behavioural insights team, whichever you prefer. If anyone at this point thinks the government is benign after all they've done, regardless of the author's intentions, the government is definitely not benign. The government is in power to stay in power, to protect its power at any cost.
The state is only there to protect the state.
Of course it is.
Protecting you is simply a byproduct of protecting it. And if at any stage those two things come at odds, the population loses out.
Yeah, the state will always choose the state. And as you say, sometimes we would be protected by certain policy legislation. But that would be accidental. That's not the goal. It's just a lucky outcome. But you've only got to look at, government behaviours. And you can apply this to any country, really. If you just take the last, 10 laws that have been introduced, or 10 pieces of legislation, I guarantee you at least half of those would be more harmful to you than helpful. Unless you live in a country where the government actually loves its people. I'm really hard pressed to think of one. Government is there to serve government and nothing else. And the people who are lucky enough to get into these positions of power, they're not good Samaritans. These people, politics is dirty. You don't get to the top by being a nice person. You get to the top by being a bit more evil and underhand than your colleagues.
But Joe, don't you know they're reluctant?
Of course they are.
Whether reluctantly or enthusiastically, today's policymakers are in the business of influencing behaviour, and therefore need to understand the various effect on behaviour their policies may be having. They're very reluctant. They don't like using these tools. It upsets them a great deal. Yeah,
I'm sure it does. I'm sure they're not laughing all the way to the bank.
Oh, absolutely not. I'm sure they're definitely not doing anything dodgy on the side. There's never been an expensive scandal or anything.
No, not a single one. And if anyone says otherwise, I'm going to call shenanigans.
Nobody has ever claimed a Snickers, and if they did, it was the most reluctant thing they've ever done.
These people are ridiculous. I mean, they abuse their positions so thoroughly, and then they have the temerity to accuse us of not being capable of making the best decisions for ourselves, while they spend our money on stuff they don't need and deprive us of things that we absolutely do need. It's amazing.
Was that all from this, or was there another page?
You've left the last section out there.
Oh, sorry. MINDSPACE helps them to do so, and therefore has the potential to achieve better outcomes for individuals and society.
What do you think their goal is for society? Because I would say society is pretty much a dead duck at the moment. It's not cohesive. It's not happy, healthy, wholesome. What do you if this is them achieving their goals, then what the hell are their goals? Would you say?
I don't think they know.
Oh, I'm sure they do.
But I don't know. I think the problem is, I think the people who wrote this sort of thing and came out with these ideas, I don't think they were part of the bigger plan.
Oh no, I meant the government. Sorry, just for clarification.
Fair enough. Well, the government, they're as well established. They're just trying to protect themselves and do what is best for them. Forget everybody else. We can suffer. It's perfectly okay.
Imagine the sheer hubris, though, of destroying an entire society just to protect this little cabal of poison idiots.
Imagine the hubris to say that this thing that you invented, if applied properly, will help individuals and society achieve the best outcome possible. But, you're such a big brain. This is why the very first image on this thing, the very first page, was just a massive brain with MINDSPACE written in, and that's how big your brain is.
But they keep talking about the best outcome. What is the best outcome?
Well, it's whatever they decide.
Exactly.
Whatever they define. That's what I'm saying. Imagine the incredible ego you have to decide what is best for the population at large. And then your thing is so big and so mind-bendingly important. People are just too dumb to understand it and go along with it. They have to be tricked into doing it.
You could certainly argue that there is an element of disdain for the public, and I'm being polite there. The way we are treated with contempt, incapable of making our own decisions, not allowed to be left alone, to live with the choices that we want to make, forced to accept other people's choices, not just accept them, not just tolerate them, but actually celebrate them. That is a massive societal nudge right there. Think of all the things that are happening now in society that you find, don't really want to use the word, but I'm going to, offensive. Like offensive to any decent man or woman.
Their favourite word.
That you have to just accept because somebody somewhere has decided that you will accept them. Or else. That's not the recipe for a healthy society. And I'm not talking about silly things like, well, okay, I could talk about taxes. I totally reject the idea of taxes. Just so you know, government, if you're watching. But that said, I mean, that's hell compared to some of the things we have to tolerate. That's quite benign. Even though taxes is a whole nother thing. Temporary. With an end date not in sight. But yeah, it's concerning. It's concerning. This obviously delves a lot deeper into the way we're influenced, but it was really important to give you an idea of the kind of background for it. Everything the Nudge Unit has become is based on this document, on this report, and on this premise.
I think it's really important to point out that later on in this document, they do lay the groundwork for the Behavioural Insights team.
Yes, they do.
This isn't just something that's on the side and then, oh, look, we've set up this other thing. This document actually outright says we need to set up some sort of Behavioural Insights team. They don't use those words. They kind of, because obviously the idea was still in its early stage, but they do lay out exactly what it became. So they were definitely thinking of it at this stage.
But let's not forget who designed this MINDSPACE document, and it is funded by and produced for the Cabinet Office and the Institute for Government. So you can ascribe benign motivations to the authors. But I imagine that this was, at the very least, sponsored by, funded by various offices within the government, because they understood how easy it is to manipulate people, especially people who are stressed, anxious, distracted, you could say, by other things going on. Just remember that all these distractions are designed not to help you get by, not to help you make the right decisions, but to help you make their decisions, the ones they want. It's time to look past the distractions for all of us now and really start thinking about what's best for you. And if what's best for you is not what's best for the government, you are going to clash, even theoretically.
I think that's a really important point to hammer home. If we think that we are being fed by these people, has been decided by these people.
Yeah.
And they want you to make the decision that they've already laid out.
Well, yes. I mean, they've already decided how they want this to, how they want the outcome to be. It's just a case of nudging you along now until you come to their conclusion. You don't have any freedom or choice in this matter. I mean,
and whatever freedom you do have, if you go against what they want, you've made the wrong decision.
Yes.
What sort of freedom is that? You're free to choose whatever you want, but here's the correct option. Anything else? No, you're stupid.
And of course, if you go against what they want, it could result in you losing more of your freedoms. This is actually very sinister. It may seem very benign and very sort of lightweight on the surface. This is psychological manipulation. This is a government department that is psychologically coercing each and every one of us every single day. What kind of government needs to manipulate, coerce, and use psychological games on its public?
A government that knows that it has no moral high ground. A government that knows that it is not legitimate.
A dictatorship, maybe one could argue. Because if they know that most of their policies or most of their policy suggestions are going to be rejected, that's exactly why they have to engage in this behaviour. They can't have these policies rejected. They're already written, just like the media already have the headlines written.
It would be a shame if they wasted paper. That wouldn't be very environmentally friendly, would it? They've already printed it off. They know what they're doing.
Oh, especially on the £50,000 odd an hour that the taxpayers paying them for their wages. Yeah, we wouldn't want them to waste their time either. Just remember that, the government does not work for you. It does not serve you. It serves itself, and it always has, and it always will. There's no such thing as a public servant with regard to the citizens. We serve them. They should serve us. Unfortunately, it's now so dirty and corrupt. Everything that it should be has been turned on its head. We serve them now, whether we like it or not, and if you don't serve them openly, they will find a way to manipulate you into it.
And you know that's true because of how many times they painted our personal freedoms as an unfortunate side effect.
Yes. Freedom of choice, freedom of opinion. They don't like those things, and they will do everything in their power to remove those freedoms. They'll still talk about you having the freedom to choose, but you won't have all the choices. You'll just have their choices, the choices they give you. And it will be naff or rubbish. Those are your choices. The naff choice or the rubbish choice. The choices aren't designed to make you feel empowered or safe or secure. And that's a real shame. But that is why government now, I think, as far as trying to live a normal, decent life, government is over. Playing the game, being a part of this system, it's over, it's done. But we'll keep delving into it, and hopefully we will find something that reaches out to each of you. You'll find a way in which you've been manipulated, if you haven't already. And
being able to identify it first and foremost is the biggest issue.
Yes.
Once we can identify it, we can see it coming a mile away. It's like one of those things. You buy a blue car and suddenly you see blue cars everywhere.
Yes.
Or you start looking around for a certain thing and suddenly you see it everywhere. It's the exact same thing here. Once we understand exactly what these nudges are and all the varying aspects of them, you're going to start seeing them everywhere.
Absolutely. And once you identify the ways in which they do nudge you, then you can start to shield yourself against future nudges. Mm-hmm. And that's where we all need to be.
We can start pointing out to friends and family as well.
Especially if it's a nudge that you've been caught up in while you've been with someone. If they've been witness to a nudge or part of a nudge with you, that's a fantastic way to show them exactly what happened. But again, it seems benign. These people are infringing on your consumer rights at the moment. Imagine what else they've done. And you won't have to imagine for long. We will be covering it. But
indeed, that's for another episode.
Absolutely. So anyway, we hope you've enjoyed this section of the MINDSPACE protocol. We're definitely going to cover the rest of this document. It's so long, it couldn't possibly be done as one. It's such a lot to take in as well. Mm-hmm. So this was part 3 of the Behavioural Insights team. part 1 of this document. I hope you tune in next week for part 2 of this document. This will be part 4 of the series. And we will be back tomorrow with the live show, of course. So we hope to see you there at 7:30 UK time. And I think that's it for us now.
Indeed it is. It's goodbye from me and goodbye from her.
And goodbye from him.
There you go, that was it. Whatever.
So, thank you, everyone. Take care and have a very good evening. Bye for now.
Indeed. See you tomorrow.